Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Gabe with us. He's the Vice President of Expert House Movers of Maryland. Gabe, welcome to the podcast. Tell me a little bit about your business.
Hello, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm the Vice President of Expert House Movers. We're a third generation structural moving, raising, and shoring company based out of the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and we specialize in moving historic masonry structures, but do a really wide range of things.
That when you said masonry structures, that piqued my interest right away, because I'm thinking that I'm sure adds another element to just moving a structure and then having to deal with the masonry and making sure that you keep that all intact. I'm sure is another level of complexity.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Especially with anything old or historic, and masonry isn't just brick, it's also stone or
right.
A combination. And, over time, those buildings and that construction material doesn't hold up typically. And so there are definitely a lot of challenges that you don't have with, say, a wood frame building or a concrete structure. So yeah. It's a skill set for sure.
Yes. Do you have certain geographic areas that you serve, or are you pretty much nationwide?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the project is the best answer. For your smaller jobs, I would say anything ranging from 50,000 and under. We typically stay in sort of that mid-Atlantic region.
Yes.
So that would qualify as Delaware, Maryland for us, DC, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and like sort of New Jersey. And when it comes to, those larger projects that are a little bit more involved and require, higher level specialty and that pushes, of course, the price up of the total project, then, that range, the geographical range we cover gets a lot bigger. And we've gone out as far as Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I would say, sort of the Midwest.
Okay. Yeah.
We do a lot of work in New England because, of course, there's a lot of old buildings there.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
And we typically try not to go south of the Virginia line because my uncles and cousins actually own a house moving company in Virginia Beach. So to be respectful of the territory and the family relationship, we don't go down further than that.
That makes sense and seems sensible, especially when you have to get together for family events.
Sure, exactly. I think that's something everybody can relate to.
Yes. So how did you get started in the business?
Well, I mean, a lot of small businesses are family businesses, and that's the same. That's the case with ours. My grandfather on my dad's side, he actually started the business. He was originally into clearing land. He's a farmer, then he started clearing land, and then he had the opportunity to get a contract to clear some property for a new golf course, and there was a couple of houses on the property, and the person that hired him, they didn't care what happened to the houses, and as the story goes, they were in good enough shape that it was a shame to tear them down. So a couple of the folks that lived close by offered him money if he could get them to his land, and having a couple of houses to practice on always helps. And after that, they realized that there was some money that could be made moving houses, and so
yes.
they started a business originally called Big John House Movers. And then once my grandfather passed, my dad's one of three brothers, and they started up, saying they all worked with their father, but they started up another company under the name Expert House Movers. And so eventually my father's, came up here to Maryland to start his own business, and it's also called Expert House Movers, but it's incorporated in Maryland instead of Virginia. There's one out in Missouri, and we're all the same family, but different companies.
Yes.
And then, when I worked my dad all through growing up and in summers during college, I had zero aspirations for being in the house moving business. And after being out of school and working a little bit for some other folks, a hurricane hit this area, and Hurricane Isabel. And, anytime a hurricane hits, it generates a lot of work for house movers, because all these houses need to be lifted because of the new flood levels that get instituted by FEMA. And so, Dad kind of made the call and said, hey, I don't know if you thought about it, but if it's even in the remote opportunity and a chance in the back of your mind, you want to go into this business, now would be a really great time. And so that was 2002. And I came down here thinking I'd try it for 6 months and see how it went. And, here we are.
Yeah, that's funny to me. That's very similar to how I kind of got started. And I joke that I started as a glorified secretary, but, I'd grown up going to job sites with my dad, and, that's the talk at the dinner table. And I went out of high school. Originally, I went to culinary arts school. So I was working in a bakery. I was fairly happy there. But my husband had been working with my parents for several years before, and I was doing my own thing. And one day my dad's like, did you ever just want to come work with us? He's like, I've been waiting for you to say something. And that was in 2001. So, and
that's almost the same time. Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny though. So, but yeah, so I think that happens a lot in family businesses. There's always a hope. They want you to go do your own thing, but they really want you to come back.
Yeah. My dad was really great. I mean, he was never really pressured me into doing it. His main thing was he just wanted me to have a trade that if for some reason college didn't work out and, I needed to get a job somewhere, he said, you need to have something to back up or fall back on, and it might as well be the family business of whatever it is that we do. And I mean, you can, and the skill of house moving is something you really can't go to a trade school to get. You have to.
No, you have to.
It's just all about. Yeah, you have to have lived there or worked it for a while, and I had at that point, so I had the basis of the knowledge needed to go and either work someplace else or even, like I said, come back home. And so that was kind of how it started. And so, yeah, I think the nature of all siblings are not siblings, but kids, you go the opposite direction that, your family's in. And then, after a while, you realize that it's, that familiarity is always there. And, there's something to be said for being comfortable,
Yes, I agree. So I had discovered your company through a project from a Facebook post on a preservation professionals group. Someone shared a project of the Galloway House traveling down a barge, or on a barge, traveling on a barge. Can you tell me about the project? Any challenges? I just couldn't believe that there was a house on traveling on a barge.
Yeah, sure. I guess I should probably give a little backstory to the job that you're talking about, so that people can kind of appreciate the nature of what it was and what what the extent that the owners went to preserve this house. We got contacted by a couple from the Northern Virginia area, and where I live on the Eastern Shore, it's pretty rural, and the average income is pretty moderate to low, and so we field a lot of calls, and some people don't have a realistic expectation of what house moving involves. They just think, oh, I've got a house up in Jersey that I've grown up in my whole entire life, and we're going to move to Delaware. I'd really like to bring it down, Yeah. And it's a 3-story Victorian or something, in the middle of a city. And I just, that's not feasible financially or even from a doable standpoint. And so you're always taking those calls and trying to, not waste your time and not waste the owner's time. just kind of quickly get people into, sort of a closer form or framework of reality. And so, it's always a gamble whether you give those people a little bit of rope and let them kind of ramble and talk and kind of tell their story, or you kind of cut them off and just go on to the next call. And so we got this call from these folks, and, they said there's this old brick house on the Eastern Shore that it's probably 200 to 220 years old, maybe 50 years old. We're not exactly sure, and it's in really good shape. And we want to move it to this waterfront lot 50, 60 miles away.
Oh my goodness.
And so, so then, I quickly kind of Google Earth try to get an idea of what they were talking about. And it was indeed a 2.5-story, triple brick manor house of really grand proportions, with 12-foot ceilings, and just a really beautiful home that I was actually somewhat familiar with because it was only 45 minutes away from my house.
Okay.
And, it hadn't been burned. It hadn't been heavily vandalized. It was in pretty much the same condition that it had been left, when it relatively close to when it was built. And so it was really a shame that it was where it was, kind of being surrounded by urban sprawl. And they wanted to put it, in a proper place for what it was. But I just, at the time, myself or them, neither really had an idea of whether it was even possible or what the money was going to, entail to make it happen. So I immediately gave them some really large numbers to just kind of qualify their interest and whether it was real. And they said, look, we don't really want to talk numbers right now. We just want to know if it's feasible. So that kind of talk always sparks your interest,
Right. We're not calling every house mover and asking for the cheapest one.
Well, yeah, and so it was, I said to myself, well, this is going to be a lot of time. I mean, this just to figure this out. So I said, look, a lot of times in a situation like this, we'll charge for a feasibility study.
Right.
So, I'm going to have a lot of time involved in this that I'm most likely not going to get back. So for X amount of money, I'll do a feasibility study, and I'll come up with some routes, if one exists, for this house. And so what we found was, Easton, Maryland was where this house was located, which is a fairly populated place. And to get this house to the location they wanted 50 or 60 miles away, the only way that was going to happen was by water. And, the roads were too skinny. The house was a 40-foot by 40-foot by 45 to 50-foot tall.
Oh, my goodness.
It just wasn't going to go down these little country roads to this beautiful lot they had on the water, all picked out. So, my challenge was, how do I get it to an area close enough to the water with deep enough water that I can load it onto a barge? And so, I found this really, really sort of circuitous, bizarre route that involved crossing private property, going the wrong way down major highways, cutting across median strips, a move that would take, multiple phases over the course of 2 weeks.
Right.
Involved God knows how many countless hours of coordination with, all kinds of municipalities. And I just sort of laid this out in front of them. I said, look, this is what it's going to take to get this from point A to point B. There's a bazillion checklist items that have got to be taken care of to even get the permission to make this happen before we even start coordinating. And so I said, that's on you. And I said, there's a budgetary number for it. This doesn't include any of the utility line work, any of the, the police escort costs, the safety, traffic control costs. It's just, here's a number for my work. Have a nice life, Because you never expect that to ever come back to you. And then
no, I've had those phone calls.
Right. And then, fast forward 10 months to a year later, phone rings. Gabe, we've talked to all the homeowners and all the property owners that we got across. We've got some tentative, approvals, and I think we really want to start nailing this down and get into this a little deeper. And it was kind of shocked. And so anyway, long story short, it took about a year and a half of coordinating with police, Marine police, towns, counties, road divisions, utility companies, the whole deal. And we missed one deadline where we had a move date picked out. It got pushed. And then, it all came down to this past August, coming together. And the move took, like I said, it was 5 different phases over the course of 2 weeks. We had to shut down major highways. We had to leave the building in median strips for periods of time. It was a pretty complex undertaking. It was probably one of the most complex jobs, not necessarily from a difficulty standpoint, but just from how many moving parts.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the first time you've used a barge?
So that's a great question. We have used a barge for, I'd say, probably 5 or 6 other decent sized projects in the past, but none even remotely close as heavy as this was.
Right.
This house rolling down the road was 400 tons.
Oh my goodness.
Which in the scope of what we move isn't astronomical, but in the scope of what we move down the road, I mean, just moving from one side of a piece of property to another, no big deal. 1,200 tons.
Right.
We move things 4,000 tons, 5,000 tons. But when you go down the road, you're going over bridges and culverts. I mean, it becomes a whole other
you have
animal.
to, yeah. And if everything has to be, did you have to, I'm sure that was part of the process, like making sure the bridges could handle your load and everything else.
Oh, sure. And, having your axle spacings and your weights and the roadworthiness of the machinery and the material that's supporting the house, and contingency plans if something happened, and, areas where you could lay down if you didn't quite make the, your original, destination for that particular move a night. I mean, it just a phenomenal amount of work. And it was just, and of course, because of that, this move stretched out over a 2-day period, or 2-week period rather. And so it would be parked out on the major highway for a couple of days. And so people just slowly started becoming aware of this job.
Well, that's what I was thinking. If you're just parking it in the median strip until night, that's not something you usually see in a median.
Right. And then, and then it would go, another half a mile, and then it would get parked on the side of the road, and then it would stay there for a day or two. And, and then it would move down to the boat ramp, and then it would get parked in the boat ramp parking lot for 3 or 4 days. And so what happened was this attention and this, sort of media coverage just sort of started steamrolling. And, people started posting pictures and videos, and I would put posts on my Facebook page for expert house movers. And, then I'm getting 20,000 hits and 30,000 hits. And then it's on the Baltimore news, and then it's on the national news. And then once this thing got on a barge, and unbeknownst to us, while sitting in that parking lot, there was a live cam that some local car dealership sponsored that focused on the boat ramp. And anybody could just hop online and view what was going on in real time.
It's like the wildlife cams.
Exactly. That's what it was. It was, in essence, a wildlife cam. And then all of a sudden, it's dominated by this 400-ton house with all these wheels. And so anybody in the world could hop on YouTube real time and watch the process. And it just grabbed people's attention like, no one could have predicted. And before we knew it, we're getting emails from people in the UK saying they saw the job on the news. And it took legs and just took off from there. So it was kind of
that's exciting, though. That's exciting. And the move was successful. No major hiccups.
No, I mean, nothing ever goes perfectly as planned. But I mean, for the most part, there were, the move was definitely 100% successful. We had a few things that we had to deviate on with the move route as we kind of, went down from point A to point B, but all in all, things really went better than I anticipated, for sure.
Very good. That's exciting. I did notice that on your website you mentioned future flooding as a reason for lifting structures up, and I know that many historic buildings are built near the water, and with the rising sea levels, this is becoming more of a topic that's been talked about in preservation. Have you seen an increase in this area of your business? I know you said sometimes with hurricanes you do, but is it more even from a sea level standpoint, or just like with the storm surges?
Well, I'm not an atmospheric scientist,
right?
But I've grown up on the water and lived in the water my entire life. And the docks in front of our house and down the river from other docks that are down the river from us, these docks have historically been dry and good to go, and in the last 15 to 20 years, the tops of these docks are underwater
right
on a full moon, high tide, at least once a month.
yeah
And I don't know what is causing it, whether it's cyclical, whether it's global warming. I mean, I'm
right
sure that's the $50 million question, but
Something's
the sea level
changing.
is rising.
Right.
It's changing. That's correct. And then, it's not just, I don't think the storms themselves, but I think that the temperature in the atmosphere and the water temperature is maybe attributing to the frequency of the storms, and then,
Right.
the severity of what they're bringing. And that storm surge and, those higher just sea levels in general are causing, crazy changes. And, we're seeing 100-year floodplain levels in areas being updated, every 5 to 10 years. So
Yes,
you'll get a customer that'll come and lift their house because they have this crazy flood insurance premium, and they'll lift it to the minimum because they don't want too many steps, or,
Oh, yeah.
whatever the motivation is for them to, lift their house, 10 feet versus 11 feet. And, then another storm comes, and it's the biggest storm in 100 years, but the last storm that was the biggest in 100 years just happened 5 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And so then the FEMA flood, the floodplain level gets bumped up 1.5 feet. And now they're not complying anymore. And we just raised their house 5 years ago.
Right. And so then have you gone and raised a house have you done that? Like had to go back and raise the houses?
We've lifted multiple houses more than once.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. Usually it's not for the same homeowners.
Oh, that makes sense.
But, well, I mean, somebody will sell it or whatever, but it's just, it's a real thing. And we see it, especially in places when you talk about the historic implications of,
mm-hmm.
Some of these properties, downtown Annapolis, downtown Richmond, and Richmond is more flooding just from a stormwater management issue, but also from the weather. I mean, Richmond's getting these rains now that we didn't used to have, where you get 7 inches in, 10-hour period, or
a really short period of time.
4 inches in a 30-minute period. And then all of a sudden, they didn't have a lot of those from what I understand, in the last 100 or 200 years. But now, for whatever reason, these storms are just unleashing, an unbelievable amount of rain in Ellicott City, downtown Ellicott City in Maryland.
I know that's a huge issue. Yeah.
Huge issue.
Yeah.
And, there again, that's partially due to stormwater management too. They did some things over the years that upstream, have created the issue, but it still goes back to these crazy storms,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting to me. I know that, maybe, it was probably about 10 years ago now. I was at a traditional building conference, and they were talking about, some of the things that they're having to do, like in Charleston and stuff. But that was like the first time I started hearing about it. Now you're starting to hear more and more about it. But I think you're right. I think it's becoming more of an issue. And some of those things are, like the stormwater management that we can help mitigate ourselves. But other things, there's no choice but to move the building or the building's going to go out to sea.
Or to raise them. Yeah. And that's just, you get these preservation purists that, say everything has to look the way it did when it was built and all this other stuff. But as you know, and I know, I can't tell you how many historic, whether it be landmarks or sites or houses that are mandated for this or for that. You can't change this, you can't change that,
right.
Or, whatever it is. And so they get a grant, or, something happens, and, this big renovation happens, and then there's no more money. And then you go by 10, 15 years later, and that cool old property, the paint's peeling, and,
right.
Nobody's in it, and it's going back into disrepair because there's not a huge massive well of money to maintain all these right. properties. And so, some of these, you need to be practical about how you preserve them and make them so that they can be used, or that they can be maintained with as little money as possible. And when you're in a place like Annapolis, where they've got this group, Historic Annapolis, that owns most of the buildings right down by the harbor,
right?
And they're spending big money to try and figure out what's going to be the game plan for the next 50 years, because that downtown area gets flooded every year almost.
Yeah. And then
And,
that's
you know,
expensive too. And the
oh
insurance
yeah,
is going to stop paying it at some point.
sure. And
Yeah.
they, you know, the businesses that are there lose out. And, so they're looking at, I think, I've been talking to some people that are dealing with that, and they're very closely linked to that. But I mean, I think, they're looking at sea level rise numbers of 3 to 5 feet in 50 to 70 years.
I can believe it. Yeah.
And that's what they're putting money down, planning for a contingency with those sea levels in mind.
Yeah.
And it's
And
just it's going to
that's pretty much,
change
yeah,
a lot.
redeveloping the entire area then, because nothing is up that high.
Not by the harbor, no.
Right. Yeah.
And we see it a lot too. We've been starting to get a lot of calls up in the Great Lakes area, in New York State,
Yes.
because they made this International Shipping Association just made this ruling where they were going to elevate the level of the lakes like 1.5 to 2 feet. And it's going to happen like sometime crazy, like in June of this year.
Oh my
and
goodness.
No one has a say. They're just going to do it.
And is that just so that they can get bigger ships in? Is that the reasoning?
I don't know what the reasoning is, but
Yeah.
it probably has to do with something along those lines.
Yeah.
And there are people calling up saying, we've got this historic yacht club that gets flooded now once a year. What are we going to do? And it comes June when the sea level rises permanently in the lake 2 feet.
Right.
We're stuck, and we've got this. We've got a clock that's ticking here, and as soon as June hits, wow, the lake levels go up, and that just is an example of what's going to happen everywhere. But it's happening sort of in real time because it's being controlled.
Right. And I was thinking that's kind of man-made and forced, and it's like so everybody can see what happens. Oh goodness.
Yeah, but I think that you can use that as sort of a window into what the future holds for a lot of your coastal areas.
Right.
On the ocean.
Yeah.
So.
My dad's family is in Oregon, and they have a house on the beach, and we were there last Christmas, not this past year, but the year before. And just in my lifetime, it's changing. Like there's almost like 4 foot
erosion
drops from the erosion. Yeah. It's really, yeah. So there's definitely the climate is changing. So, but I'll have to look at that Great Lakes project to kind of watch that, because I'm just curious about it. So, well,
Buffalo, New York, all those big cities that are kind of all along that whole area up there, they're all being affected by that, and it's interesting. I wasn't even alerted to it until this past year, 2019.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about it either. So thanks for sharing that.
It's Ontario. I'm sorry, not Ontario. Lake Erie is the one that they're gonna be elevating, and I think actually it might be, because I've talked to some people up near Owego. Owego is also another place in New York that's historic and has had a lot of flooding issues as well. So yeah, I mean, it's happening everywhere. It's not it's not a regional thing.
Yeah, definitely. So looking back on your career in moving houses, is there anything that you wish you knew when you got started that you know now, or is there any insights you'd like to share?
For my career insights, well, it in our industry, in the house moving and raising, you sort of take one of two or sometimes three different sort of business models. One would be that when these big storms hit, you kind of uproot your company and relocate
to where they are,
those areas of the country, right? Because after those big storms hit, where those major disasters are, the work that follows, is over a 3-year period or a 5-year period, and so there's enough of these, sadly, catastrophic events that,
right.
Whether it's Katrina, or whether it's a storm that hit Galveston, Texas, or Hurricane Isabel in the Chesapeake Bay area, or, Hurricane Sandy up in New Jersey. There's a lot of people that, that's sort of their business model.
Mhm.
And, for me, that's not real attractive because, I like where I live, and I really don't want to uproot my family to go around and chase a dollar. But, everybody's got, different, sort of different priorities. And,
Yes.
then the other thing is that, for us to stay busy, the Eastern Shore where we live is pretty rural. And so, not being close to any metro areas, we have to travel to stay busy.
Right. Yeah.
So, we typically are able to stay between, the DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia sort of region, 2 to 3 hours away from home. And that keeps us pretty busy, but you're still traveling 2 to 3 hours.
Right.
And then sort of the other model is to be more of like a turnkey general contractor where, the lifting and the moving is just one part of what you do. And, I think looking back on it, to be able to be home every night at, 5, 6 o'clock, having a relatively, fixed work schedule,
Right.
being able to work in that sort of, with that model in that fashion, lifestyle wise is a little bit more appealing to me. But, growing up the way my dad worked and, chasing all these monster jobs, all over the country. And that's just kind of what I sort of, kind of the way I evolved into the business and kind of
Right.
sort of approach it in the same fashion. And so, if I was to probably do it again, I would think that I would include a little bit more of those other services into what we do as a company. Then it would allow me to stay closer to home.
Yeah. I could see that from a lifestyle standpoint. Definitely. I do think there's a lot of value.
But you don't get to do the big cool jobs.
Right. And I think there's a lot of value in niching and being really good at the thing you do. Because that's why people then come to you. So I can see both sides of that. So do you, I know we talked some about the rising water levels and things, but do you see any other challenges or trends in preservation or in building moving?
I do, since this is your audience is preservation sort of minded, or, that sort of seems to be, I guess, their reason they come to, your podcast and your website there. From a standpoint of preservation, that's something that I think there's a lot of growth, for our industry. And I think that, one of the main reasons why that is because many people just don't think moving or raising when it comes to preservation. That's not on their radar screen of options.
Right.
And I think it more and more it's happening. And, my father has been on, a lot of our jobs, that more noteworthy jobs that we've done. Many of them have been covered on, different shows, Mega Moves or Discovery or Monster Moves, or, all these different programs. And we've probably had, 10 or 12 different programs that have been focused on jobs throughout the last 20 or so years, that we've done. And some people look at that and, you guys just want to be on TV all the time, but we don't get paid anything for it. So that's not the case.
Yeah. I view that as part of our educational component.
Well, that's from my dad's perspective. One of the main reasons that he's always felt it's important, because it's a real pain. They mic you up, they make you repeat everything 20 times, they follow you around. I mean, it's not the most efficient way to get a job done,
Right.
But what it does is, from a pure profitability standpoint, it's definitely a major hindrance. But from a publicity standpoint, getting the concept of moving and raising out there in front of people, so that, the next time they come across a situation, where maybe that would be an option, they can say, hey, you know what, we saw this show, and, they had a highway coming through, and they were going to, take the property by eminent domain, and they got the state to give them money. Then they took that money and they bought a lot next door, and they moved the property over there, and we're still able to keep, those types of, that type of awareness of what we do and how that can help with preservation, especially when it comes to just development, urban development. These historic properties are just getting encroached on and encroached on and encroached on. And sometimes, the path of least resistance is just tear them down.
Right.
But I think that people are starting to now realize with this, overabundance of urban sprawl that happened after the big real estate boom, where just like everything got torn down and they just built like crazy.
Right.
Now, every single mixed use planned community and development around the country looks exactly the same.
They do. They all do look the same.
It's exactly the same. The parking lots are maximized to the square inch. The average sized vehicle has been calibrated and calculated so that if you have a truck or a Suburban, it is almost an impossibility to get in and out of a parking lot and navigate around it.
Yeah. When I'm driving our big cargo van, I have to park at the far end so I can take up 2 spaces.
Yeah, and it just and what happens is that the identities of these communities, they just get erased.
It does, yeah.
And everything is a pad site, everything is a box store, everything is a national chain, and it's kind of sad. And then I think what has happened is that people have taken tally on that a little bit, and they've realized that part of what identity of a community is the history and the stories that are tied to that history and the uniqueness of what makes that area different from someplace else. And it just so happens that, the architecture and the buildings are part of that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that, when people have these little cute downtown areas, where, it's like out of a movie. Well, yeah, because some movie producer drove through that town and said, this is perfect. People watching this movie, they want to see this because this is where, this is the ideal setting and the picture that people have in their minds of where they want to be. And so why not? Why is that a bad thing?
Right.
And, why can't,
you don't need to try to create it in these, the new trend I've seen in those, like in the development is, the stores on the bottom with living up above, but it's still the same. It still all looks the same.
It's all the same, outside of Bethesda, you could be, outside of, Boston, you could be anywhere, and it all is the same. It's mixed use, commercial, residential with a pedestrian walkway down the center and, a parking garage hidden in the middle of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's all the same. And so I think that that's starting to hit a tune with people is, let's try and save or salvage, some of these structures, include, some commercial amenities into them, whether it's, putting an elevator shaft in the back so that, the spaces are a little bit more user friendly or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in places like downtown DC, in areas, around DC, between Baltimore, in Baltimore, and also in other places like in, Milwaukee, we just did a job this past year and, Milwaukee is now having a renaissance because everybody's tired of Chicago and the crime stats. And now everybody is taking that 1 hour train ride north to Milwaukee on the weekend. So now Milwaukee is a cool, trendy place to go.
Yeah.
Right. And so now all these old industrial, buildings in Milwaukee are all being gentrified and redone and reworked, but they're keeping that skin, they're keeping the character.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, we can aid in that by, moving the buildings around on properties to open up space for new development, but then keeping the original old structures and bunching them together so they look like they were always there. Or sometimes we'll move old buildings off site. They'll dig the whole block down 30 or 40 feet. They'll put in all of the utilities and the parking garages and everything underground. And then when they get back up to grade, we move the buildings back.
That makes a lot of sense too, because then you have the kind of the best of both worlds.
There you go.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about your moving and your raising. I did think that one thing was interesting on your website was that you actually move and lift industrial equipment also. Is that something that you do like just to kind of fill in, or is that a major part of your business when you're not moving houses?
So the sort of industrial or equipment moving or heavy hauling kind of rigging,
Yes.
I guess, market is something that overlaps a lot with structural movers.
Okay.
So, a lot of what we do from a structural moving standpoint, we're dealing with big, semi-delicate, heavy loads that weren't meant to be moved.
Right.
And so you have to build a custom frame underneath of each one because everyone's different. And, and then you get to the point where you can start to move. But the rigging and heavy hauling, and then the industrial equipment moving, most of those components, they're made of steel usually. They're very heavy. They're very compact. They have, pick points usually that are manufactured or, fabricated onto these
they're more
components
made to
that
move. Yeah.
they're made to be moved. That's right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like I said, our work overlaps with that work, and we do, it's not a big part of our business, but we have moved, we've moved transformers, we've moved, 100 and 200 ton pieces of equipment, 15, 20 miles. We've also done some industrial steel fabrication work for, like, if we've got a couple of places close by that are large fabrication plants. They make big steel components for things, or they make boats or whatever it is. And so they'll build those inside, and then they'll need to get them outside to deliver them to their customers, usually on a barge. And so they'll contract us to come in and move these things out of their yards onto these barges so that they can be delivered. So yeah, that's something that we actually probably do, I'd say 4 or 5 times a year. We do projects that are, that fall into that category.
Yeah, and that's a good use of your skills and the equipment that you already have. It makes sense to me. So, is there anything that you wanted to share that we didn't cover in the podcast?
I don't know. We went all over the place.
We did.
Yeah, I think no, it's just it's just like all the other types of media outlets that we end up being on, whether it be by accident or on purpose. The takeaway from me is that people of course know who we are, because
yes,
I always
definitely
like to think that that we like to have a shot at anything close by, but that also that people just keep moving and raising and shoring in mind when it comes to any sort of historic preservation project, but also any project really that would pertain to, because there's lots of different options that people have when it comes to some of these projects that they're just not exploring. And that's always fun for me to be able to throw something out there to somebody that was sort of thinking about one thing or another, but then when you tell them the capability of what you can do and what can be done, and then all of a sudden it sort of rethinks and reworks their whole vision for what their project entailed. And that's always fun to be able to introduce that kind of value to people,
right? Yeah.
That they didn't even expect when they called, and so yeah, it's always nice to be able to give a customer more than what they originally thought they were going to get when they make that first phone call.
Yeah, a solution that they didn't even probably didn't realize that they could have. And sometimes, so I enjoy doing that too. So do you have any offers for our listeners? We really didn't chat about that before, so I don't know the answer to this.
Any what?
And did you have any offers for our listeners?
Offers?
Yes.
You mean as far as like
are you going to be an event, or do you have a book or videos or anything? You could direct them anywhere you want.
I guess the shameless plug, I guess, is this is probably where it should go. I mean, we have a website. It's www.experthousemovers.com. You're more than welcome to go visit us there. On Facebook, you can search us at Expert House Movers of Maryland or MD, because there's my uncle's companies, in Virginia and the Midwest. Okay. They're out there as well. But even YouTubing Expert House Movers, there's lots of different shows that have been recorded of some of our projects. I don't really have T-shirts and coasters and koozies and things like that we sell. But I mean, like I said, yeah, if anybody that's out there listening to this that, has a project in the Mid-Atlantic area or something of a little bit grander size in other parts of the United States, it would be a pleasure to take their calls and spend some time answering questions. And, like I said, that for me is what's really fun and the part of my job I enjoy. So.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on with us today. I will make sure that your website and your Facebook and your YouTube are on the page that the podcast will go on, so people can go there to find you. So thank you very much for coming on with us today.
You're welcome, Danielle. It was really great.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.